I am Harrison Caldwell, 71 years old, a man who spent his life building an empire from the dirt up just to hand it to his son. But last Friday, at the lavish birthday party I was paying for, I arrived late. Pausing outside the heavy doors of the private dining room, I heard my daughter-in-law raise a glass. "Good thing that old failure did not show up," she laughed. "Now we can celebrate without his depressing shadow ruining the mood." I did not yell. I simply smiled, walked away, and called my bank to report my credit card as stolen. Before I continue this story, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family members who underestimated your worth and took your love for granted. Growing up with nothing teaches you the value of a single dollar, but surviving the brutal Texas construction industry teaches you the value of endurance. I spent 4 decades building my commercial supply business in Dallas. My hands are permanently scarred, my knuckles thick with arthritis, and my skin carries the weathered map of countless days unloading lumber under a relentless sun. I did it all for my late wife, Martha, and our son, Derek. That evening, I navigated heavy Dallas traffic, feeling guilty for running late. Derek was turning 35 and had chosen the most exclusive steakhouse in the city. I preferred a quiet diner, but Derek and his wife Valerie insisted appearances mattered for his image. I gave them my premium credit card and told them to spare no expense. They rented the grand private room and invited 50 elite friends. The bill was going to surpass $10,000. When I handed the keys of my old pickup to the valet, he gave it a skeptical look. I nodded politely, adjusting the collar of my simple gray suit. As I walked through the opulent lobby, the scent of seared meat and expensive perfume filled the air. Walking down the dimly lit corridor, my mind drifted to Martha. I lost her to illness years ago. She was the love of my life. I remembered the early days of our marriage in a drafty apartment. Martha would sit at a folding card table late into the night, stretching every penny to keep the business afloat. We sacrificed our youth to ensure our son would never know poverty. Looking back, that was my greatest mistake. I made his life entirely too easy. As I approached the heavy oak doors, I could hear the booming sounds of a party in full swing. The clinking of crystal glasses and the roar of laughter spilled out. The door was open just a crack, letting a sliver of golden light escape. I reached out my calloused hand, hovering inches from the polished brass handle, an apologetic smile forming on my face. I was ready to embrace my boy. But then the background music lowered, and the room grew quiet. Someone was making a speech. I recognized the sharp theatrical voice immediately. It was Valerie. My daughter-in-law always had high demands and low empathy. From the moment Derek brought her home, I sensed a deep entitlement within her. But she was the woman my son loved, so I welcomed her with an open wallet. I paid for their lavish wedding and provided the down payment for their sprawling home. I even hired Derek as a branch manager at my company, paying a massive salary for little actual labor. I stood perfectly still in the quiet hallway, listening through the narrow crack. Valerie tapped her spoon against her crystal glass. "I want to propose a toast to my wonderful husband, Derek," she announced, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. 35 looks incredibly good on you, babe. Here is to a night of absolute luxury, great friends, and zero stress." The crowd murmured their agreement. Then her tone shifted. It became mocking, heavily laced with pure venom. "And honestly, everyone," she continued, "let us just say it aloud. It is a really good thing that old failure did not show up tonight." The words hit me so hard my breath caught. I stood absolutely frozen. "He always walks around in those cheap suits smelling like a dusty warehouse," Valerie went on. He is so embarrassing to be around. If he were here, he would just sit in the corner judging us, ruining the mood. Now we can celebrate properly without babysitting an old man who cannot even pronounce the wine we are drinking." Most people laughed. It was a cruel, suffocating laughter. I waited, my heart pounding violently against my ribs. I waited for my son, the boy I had given my entire life to stand up and defend me. I waited for Derek to demand respect for the father funding the food in their mouths. Instead, I heard Derek's voice ring out over the crowd. He laughed. It was a casual, easy, and completely dismissive laugh. "You are totally right, babe," Derek said smoothly. "He is probably asleep in his worn-out recliner by now, anyway. Let us just enjoy the night. Cheers to us." The sound of 50 crystal glasses clinking together echoed through the wooden door like shattering glass. I did not push the door open or storm into the room to scream. 30 years of surviving the unforgiving world of corporate construction had taught me one undeniable truth. Anger is loud, but true power is completely silent. I pulled my hand away from the brass handle. My chest felt hollow. The image of Martha's frayed winter coat flashed through my mind again, and a cold, unyielding resolve washed over my soul. They thought I was a failure. They thought I was a clueless, depressing old man, useful only for my bank accounts. I took 3 steps back into the dark shadows of the alcove. I reached into the pocket of my cheap suit and pulled out my cell phone. I dialed the direct concierge number for my premium bank account. The line rang twice before a polite operator answered. "Good evening, Mr. Caldwell. How can I assist you tonight?" the operator asked. My voice was steady, void of any emotion. "I need to report my credit card as compromised," I said quietly, keeping my eyes fixed on the sliver of light coming from the dining room. "Cancel it immediately. Freeze the account. Decline all pending authorizations effective right this second." "Are you sure, sir?" the operator verified. "This will instantly block all transactions." "I am absolutely sure," I replied. I hung up the phone and looked at the heavy oak doors one last time. I could still hear them laughing inside, blissfully unaware that the solid ground had just disappeared from beneath their feet. I checked my wristwatch. It was 8:45. Dinner had been served and desserts were likely being prepared. The waiter would bring the $10,000 bill in exactly 15 minutes. I turned around and walked down the corridor toward the exit. I did not look back. I sat in my pickup truck, the heavy door shutting out the noise of the Dallas evening. I did not turn the key. I simply stared at the dashboard clock, watching the numbers shift. The silence inside the cabin was a stark contrast to the storm of betrayal raging in my chest. I spent 40 years building a life to ensure my son would never know hardship, only to realize I had funded my own disrespect. I took a deep breath. I waited for the inevitable. Exactly 14 minutes after I canceled the card, my cell phone began to vibrate in the cup holder. The screen flashed Derek's name. I let it ring 4 times before I pressed the answer button, holding the phone to my ear without saying a word. "Dad, where are you?" Derek shouted. His voice was entirely stripped of the arrogant confidence he had displayed just moments ago. He sounded completely panicked. "I am outside in the parking lot," son, I replied, making my voice sound weary. "I just arrived." "What is the matter? You sound terribly upset." "It is the card, Dad." Derek stammered, his words tumbling over each other. The waiter brought the bill. "It is over $10,000, and the card was declined. They ran it 3 times. The manager is standing right here. He is threatening to call the police. The guests are whispering. Valerie is humiliated. You have to fix this right now." I allowed a long, agonizing pause to stretch over the line. I wanted him to feel the full weight of his helplessness. I wanted him to realize his world of luxury was suspended by a single thread, and I held the scissors. "Calm down, Derek," I finally said, injecting a tone of gentle concern into my voice. I had a terrible blowout on the highway. I had to wait for a tow truck. The bank must have seen the large restaurant charge and flagged it as fraudulent because I was not there. "Do not worry. I am walking inside right now." I hung up before he could respond. I stepped out of the truck and smoothed the lapels of my gray suit. I walked back toward the entrance, my steps slow and deliberate. When I pushed open the glass doors, the atmosphere in the lobby had completely changed. The sophisticated murmur of the restaurant was overshadowed by the palpable tension radiating from the private dining room. As I approached the oak doors, I saw the scene unfold. 50 of Dallas's most elite socialites were standing in awkward silence. At the head of the mahogany table, Derek was sweating profusely, his face flushed a deep crimson. The restaurant manager, a tall man in a pristine tuxedo, stood firmly beside him, with a leather checkbook in his hand. I walked into the room, hunching my shoulders slightly, to appear frail and exhausted. I wiped a non-existent bead of sweat from my forehead. "I am so sorry for this commotion," I announced, projecting my voice so every guest could hear. The crowd parted for me. I approached the manager with a warm smile. There was a misunderstanding with the bank. I had a flat tire, and they locked the account thinking my card was stolen. "Please run this one instead." I pulled a different corporate card from my wallet and handed it to the manager. The tension in the room instantly evaporated. The manager nodded respectfully and walked away to process the payment. The guests let out a collective sigh of relief, the lively chatter slowly resuming as the crisis passed. Suddenly, Valerie rushed across the room. The cruel, mocking woman I had heard through the door 20 minutes ago was gone. In her place was a frantic, loving daughter-in-law. She threw her arms around my neck, pulling me into a tight, dramatic embrace. She smelled of expensive champagne and cheap lies. "Oh, Dad!" She cried out, her voice loud enough to ensure the surrounding guests could hear her performance. "Thank God you are finally here. We were so worried about you. We were just saying how much we missed you during the toast. The party simply was not the same without you." The sheer audacity of her fake lie made my stomach churn. I felt a visceral wave of disgust wash over me. I wanted to push her away, to call her a parasite in front of all her pretentious friends. I wanted to tear down the facade. But I remembered my rule. True power is completely silent. I forced my facial muscles to relax. I patted her back gently, playing the role of the oblivious, forgiving old man. "I am fine, Valerie," I said, pulling back to give her a warm smile. "I would never miss my boy's big... I am just a little tired from the road. Go back to your friends. Enjoy the celebration." She beamed at me, her eyes reflecting nothing but pure greed and relief. She squeezed my arm before turning around to rejoin the crowd, laughing, as if the humiliating ordeal had never happened. Derek walked over to me, looking entirely drained. He thanked me quietly, avoiding eye contact, before grabbing a fresh glass of bourbon from a passing waiter. I walked over to a quiet corner of the room and sat down in a plush leather chair. A waiter handed me a glass of iced water. I sipped it slowly, observing the room. The bill had been paid. The crisis was averted. To anyone else, the night was saved. But my gut told me a very different story. 30 years in the construction supply business taught me how to read people. When a man avoids a disaster, his first instinct is to relax and enjoy the relief. Derek was not relaxing. Despite the music and the flowing alcohol, my son looked incredibly tense. He kept checking his expensive watch. He was pacing near the back of the room, his eyes darting toward the exit. The disrespect I had heard during the toast was painful, but it was just words. Derek's tense body language secretly spoke of something extremely dangerous. I watched him carefully over the rim of my glass. He put his drink down on a cocktail table and gestured subtly to someone across the room. A man stepped out from the shadows near the dark velvet curtains. He was not dressed like the rest of Derek's wealthy friends. He wore a tailored suit that looked slightly too flashy, and he carried a stiff leather briefcase. Derek glanced over his shoulder, ensuring Valerie was distracted. He did not look in my direction. Satisfied that no one was watching, my son slipped out of the main party area, heading down a dark, secluded hallway toward the private restrooms. The slick stranger immediately followed him, carrying the briefcase tightly against his side. My instincts flared to life. The sharp, uncomfortable feeling in my chest had nothing to do with a delayed birthday toast. Something was deeply wrong. I set my water glass down on the side table. I stood up, adjusting my jacket, and began to follow them into the darkness. I kept my footsteps incredibly light. A survival skill. I learned decades ago while walking across precarious steel beams on active construction sites. The plush, heavy carpet of the expensive steakhouse corridor completely absorbed the sound of my thick leather shoes. As I moved further away from the private dining room, the raucous laughter and the clinking of crystal glasses faded into a muffled hum. The hallway leading to the restrooms was lined with dark mahogany panels and dim amber sconces, creating deep shadows that seemed to swallow the light. It was the perfect place for a private, secret conversation. I stopped just before the corner, pressing my back flat against the cool wooden paneling. I held my breath and listened carefully. I could hear the faint, hurried rustling of thick paper. I leaned forward just enough to peer around the edge of the wall. There they were standing near a heavy marble planter. Derek was leaning against the wall, his posture completely rigid and defensive. The slick stranger stood uncomfortably close to him. Up close, the man looked even more out of place. He possessed a terrifying predatory stillness that made my protective instincts immediately flare violently to life. His tailored suit was a shade of midnight blue that caught the dim light, and his hair was slicked back with an unnatural precision. He looked exactly like a man who made his living navigating the dark gray areas of the law. He looked like a shark circling a wounded fish. The stranger placed his stiff leather briefcase on the rim of the marble planter. With a smooth, highly practiced motion, he unlatched the brass locks. He reached inside and pulled out a bright red folder. The vibrant color was shocking against the muted dark tones of the quiet hallway. He handed it directly to Derek. My son took the folder with trembling hands. I watched Derek open it, his eyes darting frantically across the dense pages. He pulled a gold pen from his inner jacket pocket. I noticed how his hand visibly shook as he began to sign the documents. He did not read them carefully. He did not read them at all. He just flipped the thick pages, scribbling his signature as fast as he possibly could. Seeing Derek sign those papers without reading them made a bitter, sour taste rise rapidly in the back of my throat. I had spent countless hours at our old kitchen table teaching him the absolute golden rule of business. I always told him to read every single line, to never sign anything under pressure, and to walk away immediately from any deal that had to be done in the shadows. Martha and I had sacrificed our blood and sweat to build Caldwell Construction Supplies from nothing. We faced ruthless contractors and unforgiving markets together. I built my fortune on extreme caution and unwavering integrity. Yet here was my only son, behaving like a cornered animal, frantically signing his name completely away. I decided I had seen enough. I took a deep, steadying breath, smoothing my expression into a mask of mild, oblivious curiosity, and stepped out from behind the wall. I walked toward them with a slow, deliberate pace. "Derek," I called out clearly. My voice was calm, but it shattered the tense silence of the hallway like a loud gunshot. Derek gasped loudly, his entire body jerking upward in pure panic. He fumbled with the red folder, nearly dropping it on the patterned carpet. The slick stranger snapped to attention, his predatory calmness instantly vanishing into the surrounding dark shadows. He swiftly reached out, snatched the red folder from Derek's shaking hands, and shoved it back into the leather briefcase. The brass locks clicked shut with a sharp, definitive sound. Dad Derek stammered weakly, his voice cracking halfway through the word. "What are you doing out here? I thought you were sitting in the dining room with Valerie and the guests." "I just needed to use the restroom, son," I replied mildly, stopping just a few feet away from them. I looked directly at the stranger, letting my gaze linger heavily on his expensive, perfectly tailored dark blue luxury suit. "I did not mean to interrupt your important business meeting," I continued pleasantly. "I did not realize birthday parties required so much urgent paperwork." Derek swallowed hard. A thick bead of sweat trickled down his temple. He had always been a genuinely terrible liar. Even when he was a young boy, trying to hide a broken window or a failed math test, his left eye would twitch uncontrollably, and he would suddenly find it impossible to look me in the face. I was staring intensely at the floor right now. "No, Dad. It is nothing like that at all, honestly." Derek said quickly, his words rushing together in a desperate panic. This is just Trent. Trent Lawson. Hi as an insurance broker. We have been trying to meet all week to update the homeowner policy on my house. Since I am so busy running the branch, he graciously offered to drop the final paperwork off tonight. It is just routine house insurance. I turned my attention fully to the man named Trent Lawson, an insurance broker signing routine paperwork in a dark hallway during a $10,000 birthday dinner. The lie was so unbelievably flimsy, it was frankly insulting, but I played along perfectly. Is that so? I asked, extending my thick, calloused hand toward him. It is a real pleasure to meet you, Trent. I am Harrison Caldwell. I appreciate you looking out for my son's property. Trent forced a wide, charming smile that completely failed to reach his cold eyes. He reached out and grasped my hand firmly. The exact moment our skin touched, my deepest suspicions were entirely validated. Despite his calm, collected visual appearance, Trent's palm was completely saturated with sweat. It was the clammy, cold sweat of a man whose heart was currently racing. He gripped my hand a little too tightly, severely, overcompensating for his obvious internal anxiety. The pleasure is all mine, Mr. Caldwell, Trent said smoothly. Derek speaks incredibly highly of you. Just doing my job, sir. Protecting the family assets. As Trent pulled his hand away, he nervously adjusted his tight grip on the leather briefcase. The sudden jerky movement caused the brass latch to slip open. The heavy lid of the briefcase popped open just a fraction of an inch. It was a tiny mistake. A fleeting lapse in his otherwise perfectly rehearsed and completely flawless professional corporate demeanor today. Through the narrow gap in the briefcase, the edge of the red folder slid upward. The bright overhead light perfectly caught the top of the crisp white document inside. My eyes locked directly onto the bold black text printed across the header. Deed of Trust, the document boldly read. Lot 402, South Dallas Industrial. My heart literally stopped beating for a fraction of a second. That specific lot was the exact undeniable location of my massive central supply warehouse, generating $50,000 monthly. Why was my only son frantically signing away my property in the shadows tonight? I did not sleep at all that night. I sat in the dark living room staring out the window as the Dallas skyline slowly turned from black to a bruised purple. My mind replayed the image of that bright red folder slipping from the leather briefcase. The words printed on that document burned behind my eyelids. Lot 402, South Dallas Industrial. That warehouse was the crown jewel of Caldwell Construction Supplies. It was the absolute foundation of my entire wealth. I bought that land 40 years ago, when it was nothing but dirt and mesquite trees. Today, it generated $50,000 a month in pure revenue. Derek had no legal right to sign any documents related to that specific property. I was merely a branch manager. He was not an owner. By the time the sun finally crested over the horizon, my sadness had completely evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. I needed answers, and I knew my son well enough to know he would never give them to me voluntarily. If I asked him directly, he would stammer, his left eye would twitch, and he would spin another pathetic web of lies. I had to uncover the truth myself. I showered dressed in my usual work clothes and drove my pickup truck toward the upscale suburban neighborhood where Derek and Valerie lived. I had purchased that massive colonial house for them as a wedding gift. I paid entirely in cash. When I arrived, the street was completely silent. It was barely 7 in the morning. Their expensive imported cars were parked securely in the driveway. I did not walk up the front path to ring the doorbell. Instead, I moved quietly around the side of the meticulously manicured lawn toward the back patio. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the heavy brass emergency key Derek had given me years ago. I slid it into the kitchen door lock. The deadbolt clicked open with a soft metallic thud. I pushed the door open and stepped inside, closing it silently behind me. The kitchen was pristine, smelling faintly of expensive vanilla candles and stale wine from the night before. I stood perfectly still on the imported Italian tile floor, letting my eyes adjust to the morning shadows. The house was massive, but it felt incredibly cold and empty. There were no pictures of our extended family on the walls, only stylized abstract art pieces that Valerie had selected with an interior designer. I walked slowly past the marble island, intending to head up the stairs to confront my son while he was still waking up. I wanted to catch him off guard, to demand he explain exactly what he was signing in that dark restaurant corridor. But before I even reached the base of the grand wooden staircase, I heard it. Voices were drifting down from the master bedroom on the second floor. They were not speaking in the soft, groggy tones of a couple just waking up. They were arguing. The voices were sharp, frantic, and laced with pure venom. I stopped moving immediately. I pressed myself against the cool plaster of the hallway wall, completely hidden from the staircase landing above. I held my breath, focusing all my attention on the harsh sounds echoing down the wooden steps. It was Valerie. Her voice was usually carefully modulated and artificially sweet, but right now it was a harsh, terrifying hiss. I could hear the aggressive clicking of her heels pacing rapidly across the hardwood floor of the upstairs hallway. "You are moving entirely too slow, Derek." Valerie screamed, her voice completely devoid of any affection. "We are running out of time. We cannot afford another delay like that ridiculous stunt with the credit card last night. Do you understand how close we came to complete humiliation?" Derek responded, his voice muffled and defensive. "I am doing the best I can, Valerie. Trent said the paperwork has to be perfect. The bank requires multiple signatures for a commercial mortgage of this massive size. My dad owns that property free and clear. The underwriters are going to scrutinize every single page." I heard a loud smack like a magazine or a folder hitting a wooden table. "They will not scrutinize anything if you just follow Trent's instructions," Valerie snapped aggressively. "We already have the forged power of attorney. It is perfectly notarized. Trent made sure the signature looks exactly like the old man's messy handwriting. We have total legal control over his estate now. You just need to push the application through and mortgage the damn warehouse for the $3 million. My blood turned to absolute ice in my veins. Forged power of attorney. They had fabricated legal documents to seize control of my life. But the horror did not stop there. Derek groaned loudly. I know. But if the bank calls him to verify the loan, we are completely finished. He is perfectly sharp when it comes to business. He checks his accounts. He will know something is wrong." "No, he will not." Valerie laughed cruelly. "You are worrying about nothing." Trent already slipped the medical file into the bank's secondary verification package. The fake dementia diagnosis is sitting right there on top. Dr. Evans signed off on it perfectly. It legally states your father has severe, rapidly advancing Alzheimer's disease and cannot manage his own financial affairs. The bank will not call a dying, incompetent old man to verify a commercial loan. They will call you, his legal guardian. He is 71 years old, Derek. He is an old, trusting fool. He will never check the county deed records, and by the time he figures anything out, the $3 million will be safe in our accounts. I stood completely paralyzed in the dark hallway of the home I had bought for them. My chest tightened so severely, I felt as though I was physically suffocating. The sheer magnitude of their betrayal was incomprehensible. They were not just ungrateful, entitled children stealing a little money from my wallet. They were actively, methodically stealing my entire life's work. Worse than that, they had bribed a corrupt doctor to declare me mentally incompetent. They were maliciously attempting to strip away my human dignity, my legal rights, and my sanity simply to fund their luxurious lifestyle. I closed my eyes as a profound, chilling silence fell over my soul. I did not storm up the stairs to scream at them. I did not smash the expensive vases or demand an explanation. An explanation was entirely useless now. They had declared war on me, and I was going to fight back with a level of ruthlessness they could not possibly imagine. I opened my eyes, turned around, and retraced my steps through the pristine kitchen. I slipped out the back door, closing it silently behind me. I walked directly to my truck. My cold mind was already busy formulating the perfect, devastating, and deeply painful counterattack. I started the old engine, slowly shifting the heavy truck into gear, and drove away down the quiet suburban street to prepare for their absolute and total ruin. The drive from the quiet suburban streets of my son's neighborhood to the towering glass skyscrapers of downtown Dallas felt like navigating through a thick fog. My hands gripped the steering wheel of my pickup truck so tightly that my knuckles ached. The physical discomfort was nothing compared to the violent storm raging inside my mind. They had forged a power of attorney. They had bribed a medical professional to declare me mentally incompetent. They were attempting to steal $3 million by mortgaging the central warehouse I had spent my entire life building. I needed a flawless strategy, and I needed the sharpest legal mind in Texas to help me execute it. I drove straight to see Jonathan Bradley. Jonathan was a ruthless veteran lawyer who possessed an intellect as sharp as a newly forged blade. More importantly, he was my closest friend. We had known each other for 40 years. When I finally parked my truck in the underground garage of his prestigious building, I took a long moment to compose myself. I smoothed my jacket, wiped the cold sweat from my forehead, and walked into the grand marble lobby. The receptionist recognized me immediately and guided me straight back to his massive corner office. Jonathan was sitting behind his heavy oak desk, reviewing a stack of dense legal contracts. When he looked up and saw my face, his professional demeanor instantly dissolved into deep concern. He stood. I took off his reading glasses, asking me what was wrong, noting that I looked as though I had just seen a ghost. I closed the heavy wooden door behind me and sank into one of his plush leather visitor chairs. I spent the next 20 minutes telling him absolutely everything. I told him about the humiliating toast at the birthday dinner, the canceled credit card, the bright red folder in the shadows, and the terrifying conversation I had just overheard in the hallway of my son's home. Jonathan listened in complete silence, his jaw clenching tighter with every single sentence. When I finished, Jonathan walked over to a small mahogany cabinet and quietly poured 2 glasses of strong scotch. He handed one to me and sat on the edge of his desk. He reminded me of the first time we met. He spoke of how Martha and I drove up to his small office in a rusty pickup truck, our clothes covered in drywall dust. We had barely enough money to pay his retainer to incorporate our construction supply business. He remembered how hard Martha had worked managing the books late into the night while I hauled cement in the blazing Texas heat. We built an empire from dirt, blood, and sheer willpower. To think that Derek, a boy who grew up with a silver spoon, was trying to tear down Martha's legacy filled him with deep, quiet rage. He set his glass down on the desk and turned to his computer. "We need to verify exactly how far they have gone," Jonathan said. His voice dropped an octave into a completely professional, clinical tone. He began typing rapidly, logging into various secure state and county databases. Because he was my designated legal counsel for all corporate affairs, he had immediate access to my property deeds and general financial filings. The silence in the office was suffocating, broken only by the rapid clicking of his keyboard. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Suddenly, Jonathan stopped typing. He let out a long, heavy breath and leaned back in his leather chair, rubbing his temples. It was worse than we had expected. "They moved incredibly fast, Harrison," Jonathan said, turning the computer monitor toward me so I could clearly see the screen. He pointed to a pending digital file logged with the county clerk. "There is a commercial mortgage application currently pending on Lot 402, the South Dallas Industrial Warehouse. The requested loan amount is exactly $3 million. The application was submitted late last week, and it is currently sitting in the final underwriting stage. It is scheduled for full approval and funding in exactly 7 days." I stared at the screen, my stomach twisting into a painful knot. How could they possibly bypass the strict bank security protocols without my physical presence? I asked him, feeling deeply betrayed. Jonathan clicked another file, opening a scanned document. He brought up a medical record attached to the secondary verification package of the loan application. It was a formal diagnostic report printed on the official letterhead of a prominent local neurologist in the city. The document was meticulously forged, but the signature at the bottom was terrifyingly real. According to this specific legal medical document, Jonathan read aloud, his voice thick with disgust. "You have been formally diagnosed with severe, rapidly advancing Alzheimer's disease. The doctor states that you suffer from extreme cognitive decline, memory loss, and a complete inability to manage your own financial affairs." They attached this fake medical file to a perfectly forged, notarized power of attorney document. They have legally positioned Derek as your sole financial guardian. The bank does not need to call you for verification, because in the eyes of the law, you are completely incompetent. The reality of their vicious scheme crashed over me like a tidal wave of ice. Valerie and Derek had not just planned a simple theft. They had orchestrated a total erasure of my autonomy. If they succeeded, they would take the $3 million, leaving the massive debt secured against my warehouse. With this fake medical diagnosis securely on record, they could easily force me into a restrictive nursing facility, taking control of everything else I owned. They were going to lock me away until absolutely nothing was left. Jonathan slammed his hand down on the wooden desk, his face flushed with unbridled anger. He reached for his desk phone, his fingers hovering over the keypad. "I am calling the police right now," he declared vehemently. "I am calling the district attorney, and I am calling the medical board to have that doctor stripped of his license and thrown in a federal cell. We are going to have Derek and Valerie arrested for felony fraud before lunchtime." My heart pounded heavily in my chest, but my mind was incredibly clear. I saw the entire chessboard laid out before me. If we called this police right now, Derek and Valerie would immediately panic and try to desperately flee the city. They had money, and they would hire aggressive defense attorneys. They would simply blame the slick insurance broker, claiming he had misled them and filed the paperwork without their full understanding. They would claim they were victims of a predatory lending scam. They might even wriggle free from the harshest consequences, leaving me entangled in years of messy, draining litigation. I reached across the mahogany desk and firmly grabbed Jonathan's wrist, physically stopping him from picking up the phone receiver. "No," I said very quietly, locking eyes with my friend. "I want to trap them both fully. I want them to think they have won, so they let their guard completely down. We will make sure they never breathe free air ever again." I left Jonathan sitting in his office with the forged medical documents spread across his mahogany desk. The drive back to my empty house felt entirely different from the frantic journey there. The blinding fog of betrayal had fully lifted, leaving behind a stark, freezing reality. I was a man at war. When I walked through my front door, the silence of the empty rooms no longer felt lonely. It felt like a perfectly blank canvas, waiting for me to paint their absolute destruction. I walked slowly into my private, quiet study, the very room where Derek and Valerie confidently believed I would spend my final, pathetic, lonely days. I sat behind my heavy desk and picked up a framed photograph of Martha. I ran my thumb over the smooth glass covering her beautiful, smiling face. She had always been the softer side of our marriage, the one who forgave easily and loved unconditionally. I knew she would be devastated by what our son had become, but I also knew she would never tolerate us being robbed of our life's work. I placed her framed picture very gently back on the solid, heavy wooden desk. I needed to become the bait. I reached for my cell phone and stared at Derek's name on the screen. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and forced my shoulders to slump. I simply needed to completely transform into the exact person they already believed me to be. I needed to be the frail, failing, incompetent old man documented in that fraudulent medical file. I slowly pressed the green call button and brought the phone to my ear. The phone rang 3 times before Derek answered. His tone was perfectly measured, heavily laced with the artificial concern he had practiced at the restaurant the night before. "Hey, Dad," he said smoothly. "How are you feeling today? Are you resting after that flat tire last night?" I let out a long, ragged sigh, making sure my breath rattled slightly in my throat. I hesitated, letting a few seconds of heavy silence stretch across the line. "Derek," I finally said, keeping my voice incredibly soft and intentionally weak. "Yes, Dad, it is me," he replied, sounding slightly confused by my sudden frailty. I forced my hand to tremble slightly, letting that physical tremor seep into my vocal cords. "Son, I am not feeling very well today," I murmured, letting my words slur together just a fraction. "My head feels so cloudy. I have been sitting here in the study, and I just cannot seem to remember where I put the keys to the filing cabinet. Lately, things are just slipping away from me. My memory is getting so bad, Derek. It is really starting to frighten me." The silence on the other end of the line was immediate and profound. I could almost hear the gears turning maliciously inside my son's head. They had paid a corrupt doctor to write a fake dementia diagnosis, and now they believed the universe was perfectly aligning with their wicked narrative. "Oh, Dad," Derek said, lowering his voice into a tone of patronizing sympathy. "I am so sorry to hear that. You have been working so hard for so many years. It is perfectly natural for you to feel tired and a little forgetful. We are here for you." I let out another shaky breath. "I know, son," I whispered, playing the part of a defeated patriarch surrendering to his own mortality. "I have been thinking a lot about the future today. About the business. About Martha. I am just too exhausted to manage it all anymore. I think it is time for me to rest. I want you and Valerie to come over this weekend. I want to sit down and sign the entire company over to you. I want you to have total control." There was a very sharp, incredibly sudden intake of breath on the other end of the line. Then a strange, heavily muffled sound immediately followed. Derek had quickly covered the cell microphone with his heavy hand, but he was not quite fast enough. Through the muffled barrier, I clearly heard him let out a high, squealing sound of absolute, unadulterated joy. I heard him frantically whisper to Valerie in the background, "He is giving us the whole company. I wants to sign it all over this weekend." I heard Valerie gasp loudly, her voice practically vibrating with sheer greed as she whispered back to him. The sheer glee radiating from them was genuinely sickening. It was the sound of two vultures celebrating the death of their prey. A few seconds later, Derek uncovered the receiver. He cleared his throat loudly, desperately trying to mask his overwhelming excitement with a facade of solemn duty. "Dad, are you absolutely completely sure about this?" Derek asked, his voice trembling with barely contained anticipation. "I mean, it is a truly massive, life-changing step. I want to make sure you are totally comfortable." "I am sure, son," I replied, maintaining my weak, shaky tone. "I just want everything settled before my mind gets any worse. Please come over on Saturday morning. We will handle all the paperwork right here in my study. We will be there first thing," Dad Derek promised eagerly. "Do not worry about a single solitary thing. We will perfectly take care of you." I ended the call and slowly lowered the phone to my desk. The moment the screen went dark, my frail posture completely vanished. My spine straightened, my shoulders squared. The simulated weakness I had projected just moments ago evaporated, replaced entirely by cold, calculated steel. My grief was completely gone now. There was no more room in my heart for sorrow or parental leniency. They had taken the bait with disgusting eagerness. They honestly believed they had completely outsmarted me. They thought I was surrendering my life's work, but they were blindly walking directly into a slaughterhouse. I stood up from my heavy leather chair and walked slowly over to the large window, looking out over the sprawling front lawn I had meticulously maintained for decades. They wanted to steal my legacy. They wanted to strip me of my dignity and lock me away in a cheap nursing home to rot. They had mistaken my lifelong generosity for fatal weakness. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a small black business card Jonathan had discreetly handed to me before I left his office. It belonged to a highly exclusive private security firm composed entirely of elite former military intelligence officers. They specialized in covert corporate surveillance and untraceable monitoring systems. I slowly dialed the printed number. A very crisp, professional voice answered immediately. I need a full, completely invisible surveillance package installed in a private residence. I stated clearly, my voice ringing with absolute authority. High-definition audio and visual. I need it done quietly, and I need it completely operational by tomorrow night. I gave them my exact residential address, confirmed the strict details, and hung up the phone. The game board was definitively set. The pieces were moving. It was time to bug my own house. The very next morning, the private security technicians arrived at my property in an unmarked van. They were highly efficient, completely silent professionals who clearly understood the absolute necessity of absolute discretion. I led the lead technician through the quiet halls of my sprawling home. I gave him highly specific instructions on exactly where I wanted the hidden lenses placed. I did not want a massive, obvious security system. I needed tiny, invisible eyes that would capture every single whisper, every single lie, and every single betrayal my son and his wife planned to commit under my roof. The technicians worked diligently for 6 straight hours. They seamlessly integrated high-definition micro cameras into the crown molding of the main living room. They embedded a tiny audio receiver inside the ornamental clock sitting on the kitchen counter. But the most important installation was reserved for my private study. I stood in the center of the heavy oak room, directing the technician toward the large oil painting hanging on the far wall. Behind that painting was my heavy steel wall safe. It held my most important legal documents, including the original copy of my last will and testament. The technician carefully embedded a microscopic lens directly into the spine of a thick, leather-bound encyclopedia sitting on the bookshelf directly opposite the safe. The camera angle was absolutely flawless. It perfectly captured the painting, the combination dial of the safe, and the exact spot where anyone would stand to open it. Once the installation was complete, the technician handed me a sleek encrypted tablet. He showed me how to access the live video and audio feeds with a simple touch of the screen. I thanked the men, paid them in cash, and watched their unmarked van disappear down the quiet suburban street. When I was finally alone again, I walked slowly back into my private study. The house felt entirely different now. It was no longer just a home. It was a meticulously crafted trap waiting patiently to snap shut on the 2 greedy predators circling my life. I walked over to my heavy wooden desk and gently picked up the silver-framed photograph of my late wife, Martha. I stared deeply into her kind, loving eyes. My thumb traced the smooth edge of the silver frame as a profound, heavy wave of sorrow washed over my tired heart. We had built this beautiful life together. We had sacrificed our youth, our energy, and our peaceful nights to guarantee that our only son would never experience the cold, bitter sting of poverty. We gave him absolutely everything. We gave him too much. I spoke to Martha in the quiet emptiness of the room. My voice was nothing more than a rough, broken whisper. I told her I was deeply sorry for what our boy had become. I told her that the loving, innocent child we had raised was completely gone, entirely replaced by a greedy, ruthless stranger wearing his face. I held the silver frame tightly against my chest. I silently promised Martha that I would fiercely protect the monumental legacy we had built with our own 2 hands. I swore to her that I would not allow the vicious monster our son had married, or the cruel monster our son had chosen to become, to steal the fruits of our lifelong labor. I would tear down the false reality they had constructed. I carefully placed the photograph of Martha back onto the polished mahogany desk. My sorrow faded away, leaving only a cold, hardened determination. The rest of Friday passed in a slow, agonizing crawl. I spent the evening sitting in my comfortable leather recliner, practicing my performance. I practiced slowing my breathing, dulling the sharpness of my gaze and making my hands tremble on command. I had to be perfectly convincing. If Derek and Valerie suspected for a single fraction of a second that I was fully lucid, their entire scheme would go completely underground, and I would lose my only chance to catch them red-handed. I went to bed early that night, but sleep completely evaded me. I lay in the dark, listening to the familiar settling sounds of the old house, preparing my mind for the emotional battlefield waiting for me at sunrise. Saturday morning dawned with a bright, cheerful sunlight that felt entirely inappropriate for the dark, malicious events about to unfold. I woke up and immediately logged into the encrypted security tablet to ensure all the hidden cameras were functioning perfectly. The high-definition feeds were crystal clear. The audio receivers picked up the gentle hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the living room. Everything was completely ready. I walked downstairs wearing a loose, comfortable cardigan and a pair of worn slippers. I deliberately messed up my hair to look slightly unkempt and exhausted. I sat at the kitchen table and waited for the predators to arrive. At exactly 10 in this morning, the heavy crunch of tires on gravel echoed through the quiet house. I slowly pushed myself up from the table, forcing my knees to buckle just slightly, and shuffled toward the front window. I pulled the heavy curtain back just a fraction of an inch. The pristine, expensive luxury sedan that Derek drove was parked perfectly in my driveway. The car gleamed brilliantly in the morning sun, a massive vehicle purchased entirely with the generous salary I paid him. The front doors opened, and Derek stepped out. He was dressed in casual, comfortable weekend clothes, trying to project the innocent image of a relaxed, caring son. Valerie emerged from the passenger side, looking perfectly styled and completely harmless. She reached into the back seat and carefully pulled out a large woven wicker basket covered with a red and white checkered cloth. I knew exactly what was inside. It was soup. It was the classic, undeniable prop of a devoted, loving family coming to care for their sick, failing patriarch. They walked up the paved driveway side by side, their faces arranged in perfectly rehearsed masks of deep concern and absolute devotion. They looked like the perfect children. They looked like a couple who simply wanted to spend a quiet weekend comforting an elderly father. But I knew the horrifying truth. I knew they were carrying a forged power of attorney in their sleek bags, and they were carrying pure, unadulterated malice in their dark, greedy hearts. I heard the heavy brass knocker on the front door echo through the silent foyer. I did not rush to answer it. I let them wait. I let them stand on the porch and wonder if my mind had completely failed me. I let the heavy knocker a second time before I slowly shuffled toward the entryway. I took a deep, steadying breath, letting my shoulders slump forward until my posture was perfectly frail and entirely defeated. I reached out with a trembling, shaking hand and slowly unlocked the heavy wooden door. I pulled the door open, staring blankly at the two smiling monsters standing on my front porch, completely ready for their downfall. "Hello, Dad," Derek said smoothly, stepping gently over the threshold. With practiced concern, "We brought homemade chicken soup. Valerie made it from scratch this morning." I looked at the wicker basket in her hands. The checkered cloth draped over it looked like a cheap theatrical prop. I forced a vacant, confused smile onto my weathered face. I stepped back slowly to let them inside. I made sure to drag my right foot heavily across the hardwood floor. I was carefully simulating a debilitating limp. "Oh, thank you both," I mumbled. I kept my vocal tone raspy. "You did not have to go to all this trouble for a tired old man." Valerie rushed forward, her designer shoes clicking against the floorboards. "Nonsense, Dad," she cooed gently, her voice dripping with sugary falsehood. "You are our precious family. We are here to take perfect care of you. Let us get you settled comfortably in the living room so you can truly rest your legs." She took my left arm, guiding me toward my worn leather recliner, as if I were made of fragile glass. The sheer audacity of her fake touch made my skin crawl. I masked my revulsion with a weak nod. I sank heavily into the soft cushions, letting out a dramatic sigh of physical exhaustion. Derek eagerly placed the wicker basket on the solid oak coffee table directly in front of me. He unpacked 2 porcelain bowls and a silver thermos filled with steaming liquid. So Dad Derek started speaking desperately, trying to sound casual, while his greedy eyes darted around the quiet room. You mentioned on the phone yesterday that you were considering the long-term future of the family company. Have you made any firm decisions about the final ownership transition yet? I stared blankly at the dark television screen across the room for a long moment. I purposely delayed my response just to make them both sweat with mounting anticipation. I slowly raised my shaking hands and rubbed my temples actively, pretending to deeply search my failing mind for the correct words. Yes, I finally whispered, looking up at my son with wide, helpless eyes. I brought the final transfer documents home from the corporate office late last week. They are sitting securely right inside my heavy steel wall safe in the private study just down the hall. I just need to sign my name on the bottom dotted line, and the entire business officially belongs entirely to you. Derek swallowed hard. I saw his neck muscles tense as he nervously bobbed his head up and down. Valerie stopped pouring the hot liquid into the bowl. She quickly composed her facial features, forcing a bright, overwhelmingly encouraging smile to blossom across her face. "That is so generous of you, Dad," she said sweetly, handing me a warm, full porcelain bowl. "Now please, you must eat some of this healthy meal today. You need to keep your physical strength up for all the complicated legal paperwork later today." I took the warm bowl from her manicured hands intentionally, letting my fingers tremble so violently that a small amount of the golden broth spilled directly over the edge and onto my lap. "Oh dear, I am so clumsy today," I muttered pitifully, grabbing a paper napkin to dab at the wet stain on my trousers. Valerie rushed to assist me, playing her sickening role of the deeply devoted daughter-in-law to absolute perfection. She practically spoon-fed me the first few bites, maintaining a constant stream of fake, soothing reassurances. Every single second of her performance was utterly repulsive, but I forced myself to swallow the food and smile back at her with dim, cloudy eyes. I needed them to feel completely secure in their malicious victory. After several long minutes of this agonizing theatrical display, I slowly pushed the half-empty bowl away and let my chin drop toward my chest. I let out a weak, rattling cough that echoed loudly in the quiet room. "This food is absolutely delicious, Valerie, but I am feeling overwhelmingly fatigued right now," I whispered softly, closing my eyes for a brief moment. "The medication the doctor prescribed me is making my head spin in circles. I really need to take my afternoon pills and lie down in my bedroom upstairs for a short, quiet nap before we begin discussing the complex company transfer details." Derek and Valerie exchanged a very swift, deeply meaningful glance that I caught perfectly through my half-open eyelids. "Of course," Dad Derek said quickly, standing up from the sofa with eager obedience. "You should go upstairs and get all the restful sleep you possibly can right now. Valerie and I will stay right here in the living room and quietly clean up the dishes. We will patiently wait for you to wake up. Take absolutely all the time you need." I nodded slowly, gripping the sturdy armrests of the leather recliner. I physically struggled to push my body upward, groaning softly to emphasize the painful stiffness in my joints. Once I was finally standing, I reached deep into the front pocket of my loose cardigan. I pulled out my heavy brass master keychain. This specific keychain held the keys to my vehicle's the front door, and most importantly, the shiny brass key that unlocked the heavy wooden door to my private study down the hall. I took a slow, unsteady step forward and deliberately dropped the heavy metal keychain directly onto the center of the solid oak coffee table. The brass keys landed with a loud metallic clatter that echoed sharply throughout the quiet living room. "My memory is just so terrible today," I mumbled aimlessly, staring down at the keys as if I had it. "I will just leave these right here so I do not lose them upstairs in the bedroom blankets." I slowly turned my back on my son and his wife. I began my long, highly exaggerated and painful shuffle toward the grand wooden staircase in the main foyer. Every single step I took was agonizingly slow. I gripped the polished wooden banister tightly, pulling my weight upward one individual stair at a time. I could physically feel their greedy, predatory eyes burning intensely into my back as I ascended. They were watching my every move, silently waiting for the frail, broken old man to finally disappear from their sight. When I finally reached the top landing, I walked straight into my master bedroom and firmly pulled the heavy door shut behind me. I immediately locked the sturdy deadbolt with a quiet, satisfying click. My fake limp completely vanished in an instant. I walked briskly over to my bedside table and grabbed the encrypted security tablet. I sat down on the edge of the mattress and quickly tapped the bright screen, instantly bringing up the live hidden camera feeds from the rooms below. Within exactly 60 seconds of my departure from the living room, the high-definition camera perfectly captured Valerie lunging forward across the couch. She snatched my master keychain directly off the solid oak coffee table, smiling. I sat quietly frozen on the edge of my mattress, staring at the glowing screen of the encrypted tablet resting heavily in my hands. The high-definition feed from the living room showed Valerie turning to Derek with a look of pure triumph. She held the heavy brass keys up in the air like a stolen trophy. Derek gave her a swift, highly nervous nod of approval. They did not waste a single second of time. They moved with a hurried, practiced efficiency that strongly suggested they had discussed and rehearsed this exact scenario multiple times. Through the complex network of hidden cameras, I tracked their precise movement. The feed from the hallway camera showed them creeping silently past the formal dining room. They were walking carefully on the balls of their feet, desperately trying to muffle the sound of their expensive shoes on the polished hardwood floor. Derek glanced up the grand staircase one last time, ensuring I had not miraculously recovered my physical strength, and followed them down. Satisfied that I was safely locked away in my bedroom, he nudged Valerie forward. They stopped right in front of the heavy oak doors of my private study. Valerie slid the shiny brass key into the lock. It turned with a soft, distinct click. They pushed the heavy doors open and slipped inside, completely unaware that my invisible eyes were watching their every move. I gently tapped the bright glass screen of the tablet, instantly switching the digital view to the microscopic lens embedded deep in the spine of the encyclopedia on my bookshelf. The camera angle provided a flawless, unobstructed view of the entire room. Derek and Valerie walked directly past my massive mahogany desk. They did not even glance at the expensive electronics or the small metal box of emergency cash I always kept hidden in the top right drawer. They had absolutely no interest in petty theft today. They were playing an entirely different, far more lucrative game. Derek reached up and grabbed the ornate wooden frame of the large oil painting hanging on the far wall. He swung it smoothly outward on its hidden brass hinges, revealing the heavy steel door of my secure wall safe. He stepped back and looked expectantly at Valerie. She pulled a small, crumpled piece of folded paper from her pocket. She had somehow managed to secretly memorize or steal my private combination. I watched in total, sickening silence as her slender fingers spun the metal dial. Right, left, right. The heavy steel bolts finally retracted with a loud metallic clanking sound. Derek pulled the heavy door wide open. He began frantically pulling out stacks of manila folders, tossing them carelessly onto my desk. They were not looking for money or bearer bonds. They were frantically searching for something highly specific and deeply personal. I watched my son ruthlessly discard the deeds to my vehicles and the titles to various smaller commercial properties. Then he pulled out a thick, sealed ivory envelope. He ripped it open rapidly, his eyes scanning the dense legal text printed on the heavy parchment paper. "I found it," Derek whispered fiercely, holding the important papers up to the bright overhead light. "It is his original last will and testament." Valerie stepped much closer, her eyes gleaming with absolute, unfiltered malice. "Read the final execution clause," she demanded sharply. Derek flipped aggressively to the final page of the thick legal document. He leaves absolutely everything in the entire estate to a blind trust, Derek read, his voice dripping with pure, unadulterated disgust. The trust is completely managed by Jonathan Bradley, and it is entirely designated for a series of local trade school scholarships. I get absolutely nothing from this estate, except a small, deeply insulting monthly stipend. He slammed the delicate papers down onto the polished surface of my desk. "Burn it," Derek commanded her coldly. "Just take it home tonight and burn it in the backyard fireplace. The new will I had my corporate lawyer draft leaves everything entirely to me. Once the $3 million commercial mortgage officially clears next week, we will have complete unchecked control of his liquid assets. We will stick him in Shady Pines nursing home by the very end of the month. Book him the cheapest, most basic package they have available. The man does not even know what day of the week it is anymore. He will not know the difference between a luxury suite and a shared room in a dismal state facility. Let him rot there." My breath caught painfully in my throat. Hearing my own flesh and blood calmly plot to lock me away in a dismal, depressing facility felt like a physical knife twisting deep in my gut. But the ultimate unforgivable agony was yet to come. Valerie walked slowly around the heavy mahogany desk. She paused deliberately in front of the silver-framed photograph of my late wife, Martha. She picked it up, holding the beautiful picture of the woman who had sacrificed her entire life to provide for Derek. Valerie stared closely at Martha's kind, smiling face. Her upper lip curled into a harsh sneer of profound, unadulterated contempt. Finally, Valerie whispered, her voice laced with pure, toxic venom. "We are going to completely rid ourselves of the poor, trashy stench of this pathetic family forever." She ran her manicured fingernail viciously over the glass covering Martha's face. "Your precious son is about to become a very wealthy man, Martha, and your stupid husband is going to die, drooling in a cheap, lonely hospital bed. Thank God the old bat died early, so she does not have to watch us spend all her miserable, hard-earned money." With a swift, incredibly aggressive motion, Valerie slammed the silver frame face down onto the hard wooden surface of the desk. The sharp, violent crack of the glass shattering against the solid mahogany echoed loudly through the crisp audio feed of my tablet. I sat on my bed, shaking violently, with a silent, overwhelming rage. My vision actually blurred with the sheer intensity of my hatred for the woman standing in my quiet study. I wanted to march straight down the stairs and physically throw them both out onto the street. I wanted to scream until my lungs bled. But I forced my aging body to remain perfectly still. I clamped my hand tightly over my mouth to prevent any sound from escaping. Just as Valerie turned away from the shattered picture frame, Derek's cell phone began to vibrate loudly in his front pocket. He rapidly pulled his phone out, quickly, glancing at the caller identification. He looked highly annoyed and deeply anxious. "I have to take this urgent call from the bank underwriter right now," Derek said hurriedly. "I need to step outside so the cellular reception is perfectly clear. Do not touch anything else in here until I get back." He turned around and swiftly walked out of the study, pulling the heavy wooden doors partially shut behind him. Valerie was now left entirely alone in the quiet, secure room. As soon as the heavy wooden doors clicked shut behind my son, a terrifying transformation occurred. The frantic, nervous energy Valerie had been projecting instantly vanished. Her shoulders relaxed, dropping the tense posture she had maintained all morning. She stood completely still in the center of my study. The mask of the panicked, devoted wife simply melted away, revealing the cold, calculating core beneath. She slowly turned her head, scanning the polished mahogany walls and the rows of leather-bound books. She was completely oblivious to the microscopic lens tracking her every single breath. She reached deep into the hidden interior pocket of her expensive designer handbag and pulled out a small black mobile phone. It was not her usual device. It was a cheap disposable burner phone, the kind purchased with cash to avoid leaving any digital footprint. My heart hammered a painful rhythm against my ribs as I stared at the glowing screen of my encrypted tablet. The high-definition audio receiver captured the soft clicking sounds as her long fingernails tapped rapidly against the glass screen. She held the small black device up to her ear, shifting her weight casually onto one leg. I watched her manicured hand brush a stray lock of hair behind her ear. Her lips curved upward into a slow, deeply satisfied smile. The silence in my study was absolute magnifying, the faint ringing tone echoing from the small speaker of her burner phone. The sound sent a fresh wave of freezing apprehension down my spine. The line connected with a soft click. Valerie did not wait for the person on the other end to speak. "Trent, baby, it is done," Valerie murmured. Her voice was incredibly soft, vibrating with a dark, intimate affection she never used when speaking to my son. The intimacy of her tone hit me like a physical blow. "It is completely finished. The idiot actually found the original will just like we planned." I sat on the edge of my mattress, my breath catching sharply in my throat. "Trent." She was talking to Trent Lawson, the slick, sweating insurance broker from the steakhouse, the man who handed my son the red folder containing the deed to my central warehouse. My mind scrambled to connect the jagged pieces of this puzzle. Valerie laughed quietly, a dark sound that chilled my blood. "Yes, he is terrified right now." Now she continued pacing slowly back and forth across my Persian rug. "He wants to take the document home tonight and burn it in the backyard fire pit. He is convinced his new forged will is going to make him the sole king of the castle. He has absolutely no idea what is actually coming." I tightened my grip on the tablet, my knuckles turning white. The magnitude of her deception was beginning to unfold. Valerie stopped pacing and leaned casually against my heavy mahogany desk right next to the shattered silver frame containing Martha's photograph. "The commercial mortgage application is perfectly on track," she told Trent, her voice dropping into a rapid business-like cadence. "The bank underwriter just called him to confirm the final details. The $3 million will officially clear tomorrow morning, directly into our joint checking account. Just as we planned, baby. As soon as those funds become fully available, I am going to initiate the wire transfer. I will move the entire balance straight into the secure offshore account we set up in the Caymans. It will be completely untraceable before the bank even opens for business." My chest ached with a suffocating pressure. They were executing a flawlessly designed financial massacre. And what about Derek? I heard the faint sound of Trent's voice asking through the phone speaker. Valerie let out a sharp sigh, tossing her hair over her shoulder. "Do not worry about that pathetic fool," she replied coldly. "That idiot Derek will be left holding the entire bag. He is the one whose signature is on the fraudulent bank documents. He is the legal guardian holding the fake medical diagnosis. When the bank realizes the money has vanished, they will look straight at him. Federal investigators will tear his life apart. He will go to federal prison for elder fraud, and by the time he figures out what actually happened, we will be long gone. I will meet you at the private terminal at the airport tomorrow night. Have the tickets for Mexico ready. I love you so much." She ended the call and slipped the black burner phone back into the hidden pocket of her designer handbag. She picked up a small compact mirror, checked her lipstick, and smoothed her clothes perfectly, reassembling her mask of the supportive, anxious wife. The revelation struck me with the force of a freight train. Trent Lawson was not just a corrupt broker hired to facilitate a fraudulent loan. He was Valerie's secret lover. They had orchestrated this entire nightmare together. They had manipulated my greedy son into committing severe federal crimes strictly to use him as their perfect disposable scapegoat. They were framing him to steal my massive fortune and run away, leaving him to take the absolute fall for the destruction of his own father. It was a double betrayal of the most malicious kind imaginable. I sat perfectly still in the dim light of my locked bedroom, staring blankly at the paused video feed on my tablet. A single tear escaped my eye and tracked slowly down my weathered cheek. It was not a tear of grief for the loss of my money. It was a tear of profound mourning for the boy I had raised. Derek had betrayed me in the worst possible way. He had agreed to lock me in a cheap nursing home and steal my life's work. He was a traitor to his own blood. But looking at the cold reality of the situation, I realized he was also being played for an absolute fool. He was nothing more than a pathetic blind pawn in his wife's wicked game. He had sold his soul to a woman who was actively plotting to destroy him and leave him rotting in a federal prison cell. I raised my hand and wiped the tear from my face. That would be the last tear I ever shed for this family. The sorrow weighing down my heart was incinerated, replaced by burning resolve. I spent 40 years defending my business from ruthless competitors, and I was not about to let two parasites dismantle my legacy. I thought about Martha, about the long nights we spent building a life of integrity. They thought they had completely won. They thought they had secured their offshore accounts and their tickets to a sunny paradise. They had no idea that I was holding every single string in this web. I turned off the tablet screen and placed it securely on my bedside table. I stood up slowly, straightening my spine until the fake frailty was gone forever. The time for hiding in the dark shadows was officially over. It was finally time to step out and end them all. I waited in my locked bedroom for 10 minutes, giving Valerie time to finish her treacherous call and sneak downstairs. I splashed cold water on my face and rubbed my eyes vigorously until they were bloodshot, simulating the groggy disorientation of an old man waking from a heavily medicated sleep. I slowly unlocked my door and shuffled down the grand wooden staircase, leaning heavily against the banister. When I reached the bottom landing, I found Derek and Valerie sitting close together on the sofa. They were holding hands and smiling warmly. The falseness of the domestic scene was nauseating, but I forced a weak smile. "Oh, you two are still here," I murmured, keeping my voice low and scratchy. Derek immediately stood up, looking incredibly attentive. "Of course we are here, Dad," he said smoothly. "We wanted to make sure you woke up feeling rested." Valerie quickly chimed in, asking if I needed another bowl of hot soup. I shook my head slowly, gripping the recliner for physical support. "I am just so exhausted today," I whispered, pressing a trembling hand to my forehead. "I think the stress of making such a massive decision about the company is taking a heavy toll on my failing mind. I do not think I have the mental energy to read through complex transfer documents right now." The bright, greedy smiles on their faces faltered. I saw a brief flash of genuine panic dart across Derek's eyes. He opened his mouth to protest, to push me into signing immediately, but I did not give him the chance. I raised my hand to silence him gently. "Do not worry, son," I continued, my tone completely reassuring. "I still want you to have the entire company. I just want to ensure everything is handled properly so no one can challenge your ownership. Let us schedule a formal meeting at Jonathan Bradley's law office on Monday morning. We will sign every document together in his main boardroom, and we can finally finalize everything." Derek visibly relaxed his shoulders, dropping with a heavy sigh of profound relief. He nodded eagerly. "That sounds like a brilliant plan, Dad. We will be there first thing on Monday." They stayed for another 15 minutes, pouring out fake affection, before finally walking out to their luxury sedan. I stood by the front window and watched them drive away down the quiet suburban street. The exact moment their car disappeared from sight, my frail posture vanished entirely. My physical movements became sharp, precise, and completely deliberate. I downloaded every video and audio file from the security tablet onto a secure external drive. I changed into a crisp, tailored shirt and sturdy leather shoes. Grabbing the drive, I drove directly to the towering glass skyscrapers of downtown Dallas. I did not bother making an appointment. I walked straight past the receptionist and entered Jonathan's corner office. He was sitting behind his heavy oak desk. He looked up, instantly recognizing the hardened, furious determination burning in my eyes. I sat across from him and placed the drive on his desk. "Plug this in, Jonathan," I said, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. You need to see exactly what kind of monsters we are dealing with. Jonathan opened the video files on his computer. I sat in chilling silence as we watched the horrific events of the morning unfold on his large monitor. We watched Derek and Valerie break into my private safe. We listened to my son calmly suggest locking me away in the cheapest nursing home to rot. We saw Valerie viciously slam the framed photograph of Martha face down onto the mahogany desk. Jonathan's face turned a pale, sickly shade of white. I was a veteran lawyer who had seen the absolute worst of human nature, but the sheer cruelty displayed by my family left him visibly disgusted. Then I told him to play the final video file. We sat together and listened to Valerie's secret phone call to Trent Lawson. We listened to her explain how she and Trent were manipulating Derek into committing federal fraud purely to leave him to take the absolute fall while they fled the country with my $3 million. Jonathan paused the video, removed his glasses, and rubbed his face in disbelief. "This is not just greedy entitlement," Harrison Jonathan said, trembling with rage. "This is a highly coordinated, malicious criminal conspiracy. We are going to completely obliterate their existence." I nodded slowly and told him to make the calls. We spent the next 4 hours orchestrating a flawless, devastating counterattack. Jonathan made the first phone call directly to the vice president of the commercial bank. He informed them that the pending $3 million mortgage application was entirely fraudulent. He legally blocked the entire transaction and permanently secured my financial accounts without tipping off the deeply corrupt underwriter. The second phone call was to a highly exclusive private trust manager. I instructed him to instantly transfer the deed of the South Dallas Industrial Warehouse, along with all my major liquid assets, into an irrevocable blind trust. The forged power of attorney Derek held in his trembling hands was now completely useless, nothing more than a worthless piece of paper that commanded absolutely nothing in reality. The third and final phone call was the most severe. Jonathan bypassed the local police department entirely and contacted a senior investigator at the Federal Bureau of Investigation Financial Crimes Unit. He explained the precise nature of the wire fraud conspiracy, the forged medical documents, and the imminent flight risk posed by Valerie and Trent Lawson. Because of the massive dollar amount and the clear, undeniable video evidence we possessed, the federal agents moved with terrifying speed. They promised to have a discreet tactical team fully assembled and waiting by Monday morning. When we finally finished arranging the trap, the sun was already beginning to set over the Dallas skyline, casting long, dark shadows across Jonathan's spacious corner office. He poured us both a glass of scotch, and we drank in absolute silence, acknowledging the profound, irreversible destruction that was about to rain down upon my family. The weekend dragged on a slow, agonizing march toward the final confrontation. I spent Saturday and Sunday systematically dismantling my emotional connection to the son I had raised. I boxed up the few photographs of Derek I still kept in my house and shoved them into the darkest corner of the attic. I had to operate with absolute surgical precision, and sentimentality was a dangerous liability. Monday morning arrived with a crisp, cool Dallas breeze. I woke long before the sun breached the horizon. I walked into my expansive walk-in closet and completely bypassed the worn, comfortable gray suits I usually favored. Instead, I pulled out a sharp, meticulously tailored charcoal suit I had purchased years ago for high-level corporate acquisitions. I paired it with a pristine white shirt and a solid crimson tie. I spent 10 minutes polishing my heavy leather dress shoes until they gleamed with a dark mirror-like finish. When I finally looked at my reflection, the frail, failing old man they thought they were manipulating was entirely gone. I was Harrison Caldwell. I was the man who had crushed ruthless competitors and built a multi-million-dollar empire from dirt and sheer willpower. I was absolutely going to war, and I was going to leave nothing but scorched earth in my wake. I drove my truck into the city, navigating the morning traffic with cold, unyielding focus. I arrived at Jonathan's towering office building 20 minutes early. I walked straight past the receptionist, who gave my sharp suit an approving, slightly surprised nod. I entered Jonathan's massive boardroom. The room was intimidating by design. It featured floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Dallas skyline, a long, polished mahogany table, and thick noise-canceling doors. Jonathan was already there, organizing a small stack of thick legal files at the head of the table. He looked up as I entered, his eyes scanning my transformation. He gave a single firm nod of approval. "The trap is perfectly set, Harrison," he said quietly, arranging 3 sleek leather chairs on the opposite side of the table. "The federal agents are waiting in my private office right next door. They have been briefed on the entire situation, and they have personally reviewed the video evidence. They are simply waiting for my signal." I took my seat at the head of the long mahogany table, resting my hands flat against the cool, polished wood. 10 minutes later, the heavy boardroom doors swung open. Derek Valerie and Trent Lawson walked into the room together. They looked like a trio of perfectly groomed predators walking into a feast. Derek was wearing a light blue suit, desperately trying to project an air of confident, established wealth. Valerie was wrapped in an expensive designer dress, practically vibrating with poorly concealed greed. Trent Lawson, the slick insurance broker and secret lover, carried his stiff leather briefcase with a confident, relaxed swagger. "Good morning, Dad," Derek said, his voice dripping with forced, artificial affection. He walked over and patted my shoulder before taking a seat across from me. Valerie sat next to him, flashing me a brilliant, entirely fake smile. Trent took the final seat, placing his leather briefcase directly onto the polished mahogany table. "Good morning, everyone," I replied smoothly. My voice was calm, steady, and completely devoid of the weak tremor I had faked all weekend. "Let us get down to business." Trent unlatched his briefcase with a sharp metallic click. He reached inside and pulled out this bright red folder I had seen slipping from his grasp in the dark restaurant corridor. He opened it and slid a thick stack of heavily printed legal documents across the smooth table toward me. "It is all very straightforward," Mr. Caldwell, Trent said, flashing his predatory, rehearsed smile. "These are the final documents transferring the operational rights of the company directly to Derek, along with the standard liability waivers. Once you sign on the dotted lines, the entire transition will be completely finalized." I stared down at the documents. The header on the first page did not mention operational rights or liability waivers. It clearly read, "Commercial Mortgage Agreement Lot, 402 South Dallas Industrial." It was the exact paperwork required to secure the $3 million loan against my central warehouse. They were so incredibly confident in my supposed dementia that they did not even bother to print fake cover sheets to hide their theft. I slowly reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a heavy gold-plated fountain pen. I held it between my fingers, letting the solid weight of the metal ground me. I looked up. I looked directly into Valerie's greedy eyes. I shifted my gaze to Trent's slick, confident face. Finally, I looked at my son. Derek was holding his breath, his eyes fixed intensely on the gold pen, hovering just inches above the fraudulent documents. "Before I sign away my entire life's work," I said quietly, my voice echoing clearly in the silent, massive boardroom. I deliberately dropped the gold pen. It hit the polished mahogany table with a loud, sharp clack that made Derek physically jump. "I prepared a little family presentation for you all today. Consider it a tribute to our legacy." The small black remote felt heavy in my palm as my thumb pressed down on the main button. A soft mechanical hum filled the tense silence of the massive boardroom. The automated blinds covering the windows descended smoothly, plunging the room into darkness. Above Jonathan's desk, a concealed ceiling panel slid open. A large white projection screen lowered steadily down the wall. The high-definition projector clicked to life, casting a brilliant rectangle of light across the smooth surface. Derek frowned deeply, shifting his weight uncomfortably in his plush leather chair. He glanced sideways at Valerie, seeking reassurance, but she looked just as confused. Trent Lawson adjusted the knot of his expensive tie, his slick demeanor faltering for a fraction of a second as he tried to understand the sudden theatrical display. He kept his hand resting defensively on top of the bright red folder. They thought they were walking into a simple surrender of my assets. They had no idea they were walking directly into their own execution. The screen flickered. The first file began to play. It was a pitch-black screen displaying a specific timestamp. The high-fidelity speakers crackled slightly before the ambient noise of a busy upscale steakhouse filled the room. The unmistakable sound of a silver spoon clinking against a crystal wine glass echoed loudly. Valerie's perfectly manicured hands tightened around the armrests of her chair. She recognized the noise immediately. "I want to propose a toast to my wonderful husband, Derek," the recorded voice of Valerie announced. Her voice dripped with an artificial, sickening sweetness. 35 looks incredibly good on you, babe. Here is to a night of luxury, great friends, and zero stress. The blood began to drain rapidly from Derek's face. His jaw went entirely slack. He knew exactly what was coming next. And honestly, everyone, the recording continued the tone, shifting into cruel mockery. "Let us just say it aloud. It is a good thing that old failure did not show up tonight. He always walks around in those cheap suits smelling like a dusty warehouse. He is so embarrassing to be around. If he were here, he would just sit in the corner judging us. Now we can celebrate properly without babysitting an old man who cannot pronounce the wine we are drinking." Valerie let out a sharp gasp. Her hands flew up to cover her mouth. Her eyes widened in pure terror as she stared at the screen. Beside her, Derek was shrinking into his seat. His skin had turned a shade of gray. The silence in the boardroom was absolute as the recording captured his voice laughing casually. "You are totally right, babe," the recorded Derek said. "He is probably asleep in his worn-out recliner by now anyway. Let us just enjoy the night. Cheers to us." The sound of 50 glasses clinking together played out. I did not move a muscle. I sat at the head of the mahogany table with my hands folded. I watched the sheer horror wash over my son's face. He turned his head slowly, looking at me with eyes full of panic. He was waiting for me to yell, to demand an apology, or to throw them out. I did none of those things. The torture had only just begun. Before Derek could force a word of defense out of his trembling throat, the black screen vanished. A new file instantly loaded. The high-definition video fed directly from the hidden camera. In my private study, illuminated the dark boardroom. The angle perfectly captured my heavy steel wall safe and the large mahogany desk sitting right in the center of the room. Derek let out a choked sound. He watched himself on the large screen, stepping up to the oil painting and swinging it open to reveal the safe. He watched Valerie pull a crumpled piece of paper from her pocket and expertly spin the combination dial. They were watching themselves commit a felony in crisp, undeniable detail. "I found it, the digital version," of Derek whispered fiercely, holding up the thick ivory envelope containing my original last will and testament. He read the final execution clause aloud, his voice dripping with disgust, as he realized I had left my fortune to a charitable blind trust. "Burn it," the recorded Derek commanded ruthlessly. "Just take it home tonight and burn it in the backyard fireplace. The new will leaves everything entirely to me. Once the 3 million clears next week, we will stick him in Shady Pines nursing home, the cheapest package." Sitting across from me at the table, Derek squeezed his eyes shut. He buried his face in his hands, unable to watch his behavior. He was trembling so violently that his leather chair squeaked. Trent Lawson sat rigidly in his seat, his eyes darting between the screen, the locked door, and Valerie. The insurance broker was finally realizing just how deeply he had waded into an inescapable trap. The video on the screen continued playing without mercy. It showed Derek stepping out of the study to take his phone call. It showed Valerie left alone. She walked slowly around the heavy mahogany desk. She paused deliberately in front of the silver-framed photograph of Martha. The high-definition lens captured the cold, calculating sneer twisting her features. "Finally, we get rid of the poor trash stench of this family forever," her recorded voice hissed with pure venom. "Your precious son is about to become a very wealthy man, Martha, and your stupid husband is going to die drooling in a cheap hospital bed. Thank God the old bat died early so she does not have to watch us spend all her money." With a swift, incredibly aggressive motion, the Valerie on the screen slammed the silver frame face down onto the hard wooden surface of the desk. The sharp crack of the glass shattering against the solid mahogany echoed like a gunshot through the silent boardroom. I pressed the pause button on the remote control. The image of the shattered frame froze perfectly on the screen. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and charged with an explosive energy. No one dared to breathe. Valerie was weeping openly, now her face buried in her trembling hands, her perfect makeup completely ruined by tears of sheer panic. Jonathan Bradley pushed his chair back from the table. The seasoned lawyer stood up with a slow, deliberate grace. He walked silently toward the heavy double doors of the boardroom. He turned the thick brass deadbolt securing the lock with a loud click. He crossed his arms over his chest and stood perfectly still, using his body to physically block the only exit from the room. He looked at my family with an expression of pure disgust. Derek slowly lifted his head from his hands. His face was soaked with sweat and tears. He looked at the paused video, then at Jonathan guarding the door, and finally he looked directly at me. His arrogant confidence was completely shattered, leaving behind nothing but a terrified, broken child. Dad Derek stammered weakly. His voice was a high-pitched, desperate whisper. "You bugged the house. You set us up. I did not mean any of it. Please, I can explain everything. I swear I can explain." I leaned forward slightly, resting my forearms on the cool, polished wood of the mahogany table. I looked into the eyes of the boy I had sacrificed my entire life to protect, and I felt nothing but a cold emptiness. "You do not need to explain anything to me, Derek," I said coldly, my voice steady and completely devoid of mercy. "But I think your wife has some explaining to do. Pay close attention to this next part, son." I pressed play. The projector screen shifted, and the recording resumed. This clip occurred after Derek had left to take his phone call. The boardroom was filled with the sound of Valerie pacing across the rug. On screen, the woman next to my son reached into her handbag. She pulled out a black burner phone. The digital version of Valerie held the device to her ear. Her voice echoed through the speakers. It was not the supportive tone she used with Derek. It was an intimate purr. "Trent, baby," the recorded Valerie murmured. "It is done." At the table, Trent flinched. He dropped his hand from the red folder, his eyes darting toward the locked doors. Derek sat perfectly still. He was completely paralyzed, unable to comprehend the affectionate tone his wife used with the broker sitting 3 feet away. "The idiot actually found the original will just like we planned," the recording continued. "The mortgage application is perfectly on track. The $3 million will officially clear tomorrow morning into our joint checking account." Valerie let out a victorious laugh on the video. "As soon as those funds become fully available, I am going to initiate the wire transfer. I will move the entire balance straight into the secure offshore account we set up in the Caymans." Derek turned his head. His neck moved with mechanical stiffness. He looked at Valerie. She was no longer crying. Her face was entirely drained of blood, resembling a pale marble statue. She stared at the projector screen in absolute terror. "What about Derek?" Trent's faint voice asked through the phone speaker on the recording. "Do not worry about that pathetic fool," the digital Valerie replied coldly. "That idiot Derek will be left holding the bag. He is the one whose signature is on the fraudulent bank documents. When the bank realizes the money has vanished, they will look straight at him. He will go to federal prison for elder fraud, and by the time he figures out what happened, we will be gone. I will meet you tomorrow night. I love you." The video ended. The screen faded to a blinding white. The silence that descended upon the boardroom was unlike anything I had ever experienced in my life. It was a suffocating, heavy vacuum. It was the sound of a man's reality fracturing into a million jagged pieces. Derek remained perfectly motionless for what felt like an eternity. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and devoid of rational thought. He looked at the blank white projection screen. He looked at the red folder sitting on the table. He looked at Valerie, the woman he had betrayed his own father to please. Finally, he looked at Trent Lawson. The realization hit my son with the force of an avalanche. He had sold his soul to steal my fortune. He had committed severe, irreversible federal felonies. He had done it all simply to be framed, robbed, and discarded by his own wife. He was not the mastermind of this theft. He was the designated scapegoat. Trent pushed his chair back slowly. The legs of his leather chair scraped loudly against the polished floor. The confident demeanor he had projected all morning was entirely shattered. Sweat was pouring down his temples, soaking the collar of his expensive blue shirt. He looked desperately at Jonathan Bradley, who remained standing firmly in front of the locked doors, arms crossed over his chest. "Derek," Valerie whispered. Her voice was a fragile, high-pitched squeak. She slowly reached her trembling hand out toward his arm. "Derek, please. It is a fake video. They fabricated the audio. You have to believe me. The exact moment." Her manicured fingers brushed against his suit jacket. Something inside Derek snapped. The last remaining shred of his sanity evaporated, replaced entirely by pure, blinding, animalistic rage. He let out a visceral, agonizing roar that tore from the deepest depths of his lungs. It was a sound of absolute, overwhelming agony. Derek lunged across the mahogany table. He did not go after his wife. He launched his entire body weight directly at Trent Lawson. Trent tried to scramble backward, but the heavy leather chair caught on the edge of the rug. Derek crashed into him, sending both men toppling violently to the floor. The boardroom table shuddered. Papers scattered wildly into the air, raining down around them like snow. The red folder containing the fraudulent mortgage documents slid off the polished surface and landed in the spilled water from an overturned glass. "I am going to kill you!" Derek screamed, his voice raw and unrecognizable. He grabbed the lapels of Trent's tailored blue suit, pinning the man against the hardwood floor. "You set me up. You used me." Trent thrashed wildly, bringing his knee up to strike Derek in the ribs. The sharp blow forced a grunt from my son, but the pain only fueled his absolute fury. Derek swung his fist wildly, catching Trent squarely on the side of his jaw. The sickening crunch of bone meeting bone echoed loudly in the confined space. Trent grunted in pain, twisting his body to escape the relentless assault. Valerie scrambled out of her chair, shrieking. She stumbled backward, her designer heels slipping on the scattered legal documents. "Stop it!" she shrieked, pressing her back flat against the large glass window overlooking the city. "Someone make them stop." Trent freed his right arm. He drove his clenched fist directly into Derek's face, striking his nose with brutal force. Blood splattered across Derek's light blue suit shirt. The sharp impact momentarily stunned my son, allowing Trent to shove him backward. Trent scrambled to his feet, breathing heavily, his slick hair now a messy, tangled disaster. He lunged toward the heavy wooden doors, his eyes wide with absolute panic. He grabbed the polished brass handle and yanked it violently, but the heavy deadbolt held firm. "Open this door right now," Trent yelled, slamming his open palms against the solid wood. "Open the door." Derek wiped the blood from his mouth and pushed himself up from the floor. His breathing was heavy and ragged. He glared at Trent with a murderous hatred. He took a slow, menacing step forward, preparing to launch himself at the broker once again. Valerie was sobbing loudly in the corner, sliding down the glass pane until she was huddled on the floor, her hands covering her ears. I sat perfectly still at the head of the mahogany table. I did not raise my voice. I did not flinch. I did not feel a single ounce of sympathy for the violent chaos unfolding right before my eyes. I simply watched the three traitors tear each other apart in the ruins of their own greed. They had engineered this nightmare, and now they were drowning in it. Jonathan Bradley watched the bloody brawl with an expression of detached disgust. He did not attempt to intervene or separate the two fighting men. He walked over to his wooden desk, his footsteps entirely calm and measured. He picked up the receiver of his office telephone. He pressed a glowing red button on the digital console. "Send them in," Jonathan said quietly. The heavy mahogany doors of the boardroom did not simply open. They were thrust apart with a violent, commanding force that instantly shattered the chaotic brawling inside the room. The thick wood slammed loudly against the interior walls. 3 figures marched into the space with absolute, unwavering authority. 2 were large, heavily built men wearing dark windbreakers with the bright yellow letters of the Federal Bureau of Investigation printed boldly across their backs. The third person was a stern-looking woman in a sharp gray suit representing the State Financial Inspection Division. Their sudden presence sucked the remaining air directly out of the room. They moved with the terrifying, practiced efficiency of predators cornering their prey. The lead federal agent did not shout or draw a weapon. He did not have to. The sheer gravity of his physical presence was enough to freeze the blood of everyone standing in the room. Trent Lawson and my son were still tangled on the floor, their hands gripping each other's torn collars, panting heavily from their violent struggle. The 2 federal agents descended upon them immediately. With swift, brutal efficiency, the agents reached down and forcefully hauled the 2 bleeding men apart. Trent was yanked upward by his expensive suit jacket, his designer clothing now ruined by wrinkles and dark bloodstains. He stumbled backward, his polished shoes slipping on the scattered legal documents covering the hardwood floor. Derek was pulled up and shoved firmly against the edge of the large conference table. He gasped for air, his chest heaving, his eyes wide with absolute panic as he stared at the federal badges suddenly surrounding him. Valerie remained huddled against the large glass window. Her previous shrieks had completely devolved into a series of pathetic, breathless whimpers. She looked like a trapped animal, her manicured hands trembling as she pulled her designer dress tightly around her knees. I sat perfectly still at the head of the long table watching the federal authorities secure the room. I did not feel a sudden rush of victorious adrenaline or the sweet relief of a conquered enemy. Instead, I felt a profound sense of cold finality settling heavily into my bones. The cancerous rot that infected my family was finally being cut out, root and stem. I slowly pushed my leather chair back from the table. I stood up with a calm, deliberate grace, ensuring my posture was completely straight and entirely imposing. I reached up with my scarred, calloused hands and smoothly adjusted the knot of my crimson tie. I smoothed the wrinkles from my tailored charcoal suit jacket. I walked slowly around the edge of the massive table, my heavy leather shoes clicking rhythmically against the floor. I stopped directly in front of Valerie. She looked up at me through a messy veil of ruined mascara and streaming tears. She was crying hysterically now, her chest heaving with rapid, frantic sobs. She opened her mouth perhaps to beg for mercy or to spin one final lie, but the words failed her. She simply stared at me, trembling violently. "You honestly thought you outsmarted an old man, Valerie," I said softly. My voice was incredibly calm, yet it carried a lethal, freezing edge that echoed through the quiet boardroom. "You thought my lifetime of hard work and sacrifice was just a heavy purse waiting to be picked by your greedy hands. You fully planned to lock me in a cheap nursing home and steal the warehouse that I built from dirt and sweat. You believed I was a blind, clueless fool standing in the way of your lavish, unearned lifestyle." I took one step closer, towering over her trembling form. "But you are not half as clever as you believe yourself to be." I continued, my gaze piercing directly through her terrified eyes. "That central warehouse deed you tried so desperately to mortgage today has been completely protected. I transferred that property along with every single liquid asset I own directly into a highly secure, irrevocable blind trust exactly 3 days ago. I locked you out of my entire financial existence before you even walked into this building today. Your forged power of attorney is completely useless. It commands absolutely nothing. It is just a dirty piece of paper that only serves as the primary evidence to lock you in a federal prison cell." Valerie let out a high, agonizing wail. She pressed her face into her hands, her body shaking with the devastating realization that her entire malicious plan had been completely incinerated. She had lost the $3 million. She had lost her luxurious lifestyle. She had lost her freedom. Across the room, Trent Lawson groaned loudly. He tried to take a stealthy step toward the open doorway, his eyes darting frantically toward the hallway. But the secondary federal agent instantly grabbed him by the shoulder and pinned him firmly against the mahogany wall paneling. Trent swallowed hard, realizing there was nowhere left to run. His sophisticated, wealthy facade had entirely crumbled, leaving behind a pathetic thief. Jonathan Bradley watched the scene from behind his heavy desk, his face a mask of unyielding professional satisfaction. The lead federal agent stepped forward, completely ignoring the scattered papers resting on the floor. His voice was deep, authoritative, and entirely devoid of human sympathy. "Trent Lawson and Valerie Caldwell." The agent announced, his tone ringing with absolute finality. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, forgery, and elder abuse." The agent reached to his tactical belt. The sharp, heavy metallic clinking of steel handcuffs filled the tense air of the boardroom. The sound was incredibly loud, echoing like a heavy gavel striking a wooden block. The agent grabbed Trent's wrists, forcing his arms behind his back, and secured the tight metal restraints. The second agent walked over to Valerie, pulling her up from the floor by her arms and clicking another pair of heavy steel cuffs securely around her wrists. Derek watched the sequence of events with a hollow, vacant expression. The blood from his broken nose dripped slowly onto his light blue shirt. He watched the two federal agents physically secure his wife and the slick insurance broker. The complete destruction of his world unfolded. The horrifying reality of his own participation in this catastrophic scheme crashed down upon his shoulders. He had willingly signed those fraudulent documents without ever stopping to read the details. He conspired to lock his own father away in a dismal facility. He had thrown away his family, his massive inheritance, and his entire future for absolutely nothing. My son's legs gave out beneath him. Derek collapsed heavily onto the hardwood floor, falling directly to his knees. The painful impact echoed sharply throughout the quiet room. He crawled forward, ignoring the agents standing feet away. He reached out with trembling, blood-stained hands and grabbed the perfectly creased fabric of my suit trousers. He looked up at me, his face twisted into a mask of pure agony and terrifying regret. "Dad, please," Derek begged, his voice cracking into a loud, desperate sob. "I am your only son. I am so incredibly sorry. Please do not let them take me." I looked down at the pathetic man kneeling on the hardwood floor. The crisp fabric of his light blue suit was stained with bright crimson blood and badly wrinkled from his desperate struggle. His face was a mask of pure terror, his eyes begging for the unconditional protection I had blindly provided for his entire life. But as I stared at him, I felt an overwhelming sense of profound emptiness. The sweet, innocent boy I had raised, the son Martha and I had sacrificed our youth for, was completely gone. In his place knelt nothing more than a greedy, entitled stranger who had plotted to steal my fortune and lock me in a dismal medical facility to die alone. I did not reach out to comfort him. I did not offer a single shred of parental warmth. I stood tall, my posture rigid and unyielding. "You are not the son Martha and I raised," I said. My voice dropped into a cold, clinical register that echoed off the polished mahogany walls. That boy died the exact moment he decided a $3 million commercial warehouse was worth more than his own father's dignity and freedom. You made a conscious, deliberate choice to sign those fraudulent bank documents in the dark. You chose to eagerly accept a fake medical diagnosis that legally stripped away my humanity. Derek sobbed loudly, his shoulders shaking violently as his head bowed toward the floor. "I was manipulated," he cried out, his voice cracking with absolute desperation. He gestured weakly toward his wife, who was currently being pulled to her feet by a grim federal agent. "Valerie lied to me completely. She told me it was the only way to firmly secure our financial future. Trent set the whole thing up behind my back. I never wanted to physically hurt you, Dad. I swear I did not know they were secretly planning to steal the money and run away. Please, you have to believe me." "Your excuses are completely worthless to me now, Derek," I replied. stepping back to create a distinct physical barrier between us. You had countless opportunities to stop this malicious scheme. You could have come to me directly and asked for help. You could have simply read the legal documents before signing them in the shadows of a restaurant. Instead, you stood in a private dining room and laughed at my absence. You happily celebrated the thought of discarding me. You watched your wife brutally mock the memory of your dead mother, and you did absolutely nothing to stop her. I paused, letting the heavy, suffocating silence of the massive boardroom amplify the weight of my words. I paid $10,000 for your birthday party last week, Derek. I continued my gaze, piercing straight through his terrified facade. I paid for the expensive seared steaks, the imported premium wine, and the fine crystal glasses you happily used to toast to my sudden demise. I unknowingly funded the very celebration of my own disrespect. But today, I am giving you your real birthday gift. I am giving you the absolute undeniable consequences of your own actions. You made your bed with thieves and liars. Now you must lie in it. The lead federal agent stepped forward, completely unmoved by the dramatic family breakdown unfolding in front of him. He grabbed Derek firmly by the bicep and hoisted him up from the floor with ease. Derek Caldwell, the agent stated in a booming authoritative voice, you are also under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud and federal bank fraud. Turn around and place your hands behind your back immediately. Derek did not fight the agent. The last remaining ounce of rebellious fight had been completely drained from his body. He went entirely limp, allowing the federal officer to spin him around and pull his arms backward. The sharp metallic clicking of a third pair of heavy steel handcuffs, snapping shut, resonated through the room. It was the definitive ringing sound of my son's luxurious, entitled life coming to a permanent end. As the agents began to physically marshal their prisoners toward the heavy double doors, the initial shock wearing off the traitors was quickly replaced by vicious hostility. Valerie dug her high heels into the thick carpet, physically resisting the agent pulling her forward. She twisted her head to aggressively glare at Trent Lawson, who was being marched right beside her. Her face was twisted into a horrific mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. "This is entirely your fault! You stupid, arrogant fool!" Valerie screamed at Trent, her voice echoing shrilly in the confined space. "You promised me this plan was entirely foolproof. You said the bank underwriter was securely in your pocket, and the old man was too blind to notice a thing. You ruined my entire life. I am going to make sure you rot in a federal cell for the rest of your miserable existence." Trent sneered back at her, a steady stream of dark blood trickling from his broken nose down to his chin. "Shut your mouth, Valerie," he spat aggressively, struggling fruitlessly against the tight steel cuffs binding his wrists. "You were the one who desperately pushed Derek to sign the papers at the restaurant because you were too greedy to wait another week. You dragged me into this pathetic family drama, and now we are both going down because you could not control your own husband." They continued to hurl vicious curses and bitter, ugly accusations at each other as the federal agents forcefully dragged them out of the boardroom. Their toxic, overlapping voices grew fainter and fainter as they were marched down the long, carpeted corridor toward the public elevators. Derek was the last to be let out. He did not scream. He did not curse anyone. He simply hung his head in total, crushing defeat. Just before he crossed the threshold of the wooden doors, he stopped and looked back at me one final time. His eyes were completely hollow, devoid of any hope or future. I held his gaze without blinking, without offering a single ounce of forgiveness. The federal agent gently shoved his shoulder, guiding him out of the room forever. The heavy mahogany doors swung shut behind them with a loud, definitive thud. The sudden silence that washed over the massive boardroom was absolutely profound. The violent storm that threatened my entire legacy had finally passed. The room felt beautifully peaceful without their toxic presence filling the air. I looked down at my calloused hands, realizing they were no longer trembling. The crushing weight I carried for months was permanently lifted. Jonathan Bradley sighed and walked toward the liquor cabinet. He pulled out a crystal decanter and poured aged scotch into 2 glasses. He offered me one. We stood together in the center of the empty boardroom. Jonathan raised his glass slowly. "To Martha," he said quietly. I raised my glass, the crystal chiming softly. "To Martha," I echoed. I took a slow sip. The agonizing cancer of greed that infected my family had been surgically removed. The legal battle was completely over, but my brand new life was just beginning again. 6 months have passed since the heavy mahogany doors of Jonathan Bradley's boardroom swung shut on the darkest and most painful chapter of my entire life. The swift and brutal machinery of the federal justice system wasted absolutely no time. The digital video and audio evidence we provided to the authorities was entirely irrefutable. Trent Lawson and Valerie Caldwell stood together before a stern federal judge and were both sentenced to 10 consecutive years in a maximum security federal penitentiary. There was absolutely no leniency granted for their highly coordinated conspiracy to commit wire fraud forgery and exploit an elderly citizen. Their luxurious, entitled lives were completely incinerated in a matter of weeks, replaced by cold steel bars and identical orange uniforms. Derek's fate was slightly different, though equally devastating in its own right. My son was entirely terrified of spending the best years of his life behind cold federal bars, so he quickly and selfishly turned against his own wife. He struck a desperate, cowardly plea deal with the federal prosecutors. He offered a full, unedited confession detailing their entire malicious operation in exchange for avoiding a lengthy prison sentence. But avoiding a federal prison cell did not save him from absolute financial and personal ruin. The subsequent divorce proceedings stripped him of absolutely everything he owned. The massive, sprawling colonial house I had originally purchased for them was permanently seized by the bank. It was quickly liquidated to satisfy the astronomical legal fees he incurred during his desperate defense. He reached out to me twice during those miserable months, calling from an unrecognized number, begging for a small loan to cover his rapidly mounting debts. I politely and firmly refused to give him a single penny. Today, the arrogant boy who once strutted around upscale Dallas steakhouses in expensive tailored suits works grueling, back-breaking shifts as a manual laborer for a local landscaping company. He spends his days hauling heavy bags of wet mulch under the scorching Texas sun, quietly paying off the massive consequences of his own boundless greed. I think heavily about Trent Lawson, the arrogant man who falsely believed he could slide into my family and walk away a millionaire. I received a letter from his attorney last week, a pathetic, desperate attempt to request character leniency based on his supposed cooperation. I threw it directly into my burning brick fireplace. I will not grant mercy to the very people who intended to leave me with absolutely nothing. In a few months, Valerie will be transferred to a high-security facility where her expensive designer dresses and manicured nails will be nothing but a distant, fading memory today. Her beauty and manipulation tactics hold zero real power inside those concrete walls. She will spend the next decade staring at an identical gray ceiling, haunted by the knowledge that she threw away a life of absolute luxury for a hollow, failed criminal scheme. With the cancerous rot finally removed from my family tree, I was completely free to focus entirely on the future. I no longer needed the heavy daily burden of managing Caldwell Construction Supplies. The massive empire Martha and I had built from the dirt up had beautifully served its ultimate purpose. I contacted a national corporate acquisition firm in Dallas and officially sold the entire business to a highly reputable industrial conglomerate. The massive commercial buyout provided me with an overwhelming abundance of liquid capital. I took those millions of dollars and channeled them directly into something that would proudly outlast us all. I officially established the Martha Caldwell Scholarship Foundation. My beloved wife always believed deeply in the dignity of hard, honest work. Now her name permanently provides full, comprehensive academic rides for underprivileged young men and women attending local trade schools across the entire state of Texas. We eagerly pay for their full tuition, their heavy leather work boots, and their professional tools. We give them the exact same opportunity Martha and I had to build a meaningful, honest life with their own two hands. Every single month I receive beautifully handwritten letters from young carpenters, welders, and electricians, deeply thanking me for changing their destinies. It is a profound healing joy that completely eclipses the bitter betrayal of my own flesh and blood. I effectively replaced a greedy, ungrateful son with an entire generation of grateful, hardworking children who truly appreciate the value of a single dollar. I decided to leave the deafening noise and the painful memories of Dallas far behind me. I purchased a beautiful, quiet ranch house nestled deep in the rolling, peaceful landscapes of the Texas Hill Country. The sprawling property is securely surrounded by ancient, towering oak trees and endless fields of vibrant bluebonnets. The air out here is crisp, clean, and completely silent. I feel no guilt for the strict protective boundaries I drew. My only regret is that I did not see their true nature sooner. But standing firmly in the light of the truth is always far better than living comfortably in the dark shadows of a lie. The cool evening breeze whispers through the oak leaves, a soothing, gentle melody that finally brings peace to my weary soul. I sit on my wide wrap-around wooden porch this beautiful morning, feeling the gentle, comforting warmth of the rising sun against my weathered face. The steaming mug of dark roast coffee resting in my calloused hands smells just like the quiet mornings Martha and I used to share so long ago. I am 71 years old today. I live entirely alone on this massive property, yet the profound, suffocating emptiness I felt in that dark restaurant hallway 6 months ago is completely gone forever. I reach out and gently touch the smooth silver frame resting securely on the small wooden table beside my rocking chair. The photograph inside shows Martha smiling brightly, her beautiful eyes radiating pure, unconditional love. We survived the absolute worst of human nature, and we emerged entirely victorious. My legacy is perfectly safe, shielded forever from the greedy hands of those who maliciously sought to destroy it. My dignity remains completely intact, entirely untarnished by the cruel lies they desperately attempted to weave. The painful, agonizing truth utterly shattered my family, but it ultimately set me free. Life has taught me that true wealth is not measured by the numbers in your bank account, but by the integrity you hold when nobody is watching. We spend decades building a legacy, deeply hoping our children will honor those sacrifices. Yet toxic greed can easily blind our own flesh and blood. You cannot buy love, and you certainly cannot buy respect. When faced with ultimate betrayal, do not let anger destroy you. Let the truth be your weapon and the law be your shield. Sometimes cutting the dead branches is the only way to let the healthy tree survive. Did this story of ultimate betrayal and relentless justice resonate with you? Please let me know which city you are watching from in the comments below. If you enjoyed this journey, please subscribe and send a super thanks to support the channel. See you in the next life story. Respect.